Gopi Janamallabha Girivardhariya Yasodanandanam Bradajanarajana Yasodanam Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jai Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya. Now we come out of the mountain of Rajacharya, so that's the AC, Vakra, Prabhupada, Jai. Amachar Haridas Thakur ki Jai. Prayam Sagar Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Gaur Bhakta Jai. Sri Sri Govinda Namakunda Harapadi Giri Govardhan ki Jai. Sri Vrindavan Dham ki Jai. Navadvip Dham ki Jai. Gang Shimonoto Sivanta Devi ki Jai. Anam Goti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai. Go Premanandi. All glories to some of the devotees, all glories to some of the devotees, all glories to some of the devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Guru, all glories to Sri Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Prachadane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatadane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasti Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam. In chapter 85, verse 24, Atmahyeka Swayam Jyotir Nityanyo Nirgano Gunai Atma Shrishtaistat Kriteshu Bhuteshu Bahudeyate.
Atma, Supreme Soul, He indeed Eka, one, Swayam Jyoti, self-luminous, Nitya, eternal, Anya, distinct, Nirguna, free from material qualities, Gunai, by the modes, Atma, from itself, Shishai, created, Tat, in there, Kuteshu, products, Bhuteshu, material entities, Bahuda, manifold, Iyate, it appears. Translation: the Supreme Spirit, Paramatma, is indeed one. He is self-luminous and eternal, transcendental, and devoid of material qualities. But through the agency of the very modes he has created, the one Supreme Truth manifests as many among the expansions of those modes. The elements of ether, air, fire, water, and earth become visible, invisible, minute, or extensive as they manifest in various objects. Similarly, the Paramatma, the one, appears to become many. Purport: Sri Vishnu Chakravarti explains this in the previous verse as follows. The one Paramatma appears to be many by the influence of the modes of nature that he himself creates. How is that? Because although in truth the Paramatma is self-illuminating, eternal, aloof from everything, and free of the modes of nature, when he appears as his manifestations, he seems to be just the opposite, a multiplicity of temporary objects saturated with the modes of nature. Just as the elements of ether and so on, when manifesting in pots and other things, seem to appear and disappear, so the Paramatma seems to appear and disappear in his various manifestations. Sukadeva Goswami said, O king, hearing these instructions spoken to him by the Supreme Lord, Vasudeva became freed from all ideas of duality. Satisfied in his heart, he remained silent. So these are a series of verses explaining oneness, and these are stated by Krishna himself in reply to Vasudeva's praise, where he talks about the greatness of Krishna, etc. Of course, Krishna acts as a son, and therefore, in one sense, he refuses this type of praise, preferring more intimate relationships than that of being an exalted form of the Supreme Lord. So in these verses, he talks about as if he were not the Supreme Lord, but everything is emanating from this oneness, that we're all, products of one supreme entity ultimately. And this is quite similar, of course, to impersonalism, because in this particular verse, we have the word nirguna mentioned, Atma, Eka, etc., Swayam Jyoti, which are often used to indicate Brahman. There's one Brahman who is the Atma, who is self-effulgent and beyond the gunas, has no qualities. So very similar to the statements that the Mayavadis use to support their philosophy. Of course, there is a slight difference in one sense, but nevertheless, people can use this as in support of impersonalism in the Bhagavatam. And some commentators will also do that. They'll show how this actually is indicating impersonalism, and that beyond Krishna there's the impersonal Brahman. Huh? Because that's literally what Krishna is saying here, that he is, I'm just an ordinary living entity, and above this is this one Atma, one Eka Atma, whatever, without qualities, above everything, and then it manifests as many. So this is a little bit distinct from Mayavad philosophy, of course, because there is a manifestation of many, and he doesn't call it illusory here. Whereas in Mayavad philosophy, the impersonal Brahman manifests variety of this world, but actually it's illusory. So that's not stated here. It says it manifests different objects of this world. And then he gives the example here of the elements. Elements produce objects. They combine together, and the objects that we see in this material world are products of the combination of the elements. And there's a very great variety of these objects in the world. We cannot count the number of objects in this world. And nevertheless, the elements are very simple, only 5 elements, but they produce a great variety. So similarly, Supreme Lord is one, and then he manifests great variety. The emphasis here is upon this one supreme entity, and then everything else is secondary to that, produced by the Supreme Lord. And Krishna does not identify himself as the Supreme Lord, but rather is one of these entities who's manifested from the Supreme Oneness. And then we see that Vasudeva also accepts this. Oh yes, let us become free from all duality and see everything as one. So this, of course, is an example of how the Supreme Lord and Vasudeva are playing a certain part. And we can't say that that represents the absolute truth. They are playing a certain role for a certain purpose only. And therefore, we have to take these verses in context. We'll find other examples of that. There's whole sections in the 3rd canto dedicated to describing the impersonal Brahman, and in Krishna himself in the 11th canto in describing to Uddhava Jnana. Then he also describes for several chapters this impersonal Brahman. As we see from the 1st canto of Bhagavatam, we do not reject such a realization, because Brahman, Paramama, and Bhagavan are all part of one entity. So yes, there is one entity, and the Brahman is one aspect of that. So there's no untruth stated here. At the same time, it's not the complete truth. So though this is true, higher than that Brahman aspect of substance, the Brahman substance with no qualities, is the form of Bhagavan. So simply by stating this, that there's the one entity, it does not, should not conclude that therefore that's the only entity that exists in Supreme Brahman, but rather there's a form of the Lord also there in Bhagavan. So this is often misunderstood. Similarly, in the Upanishads, we have sections that will describe things like this. But then we'll find other sections of the Upanishads that explain the Purusha, Supreme Lord. And examples are given from the Svetasvatara Upanishad that talks about the Supreme Lord, and he's the chief among many, and he supplies to the jiva, he's the witness of the jiva, etc. So there we have a position of the Supreme Lord who is relating to other objects in the material world, but he is also separate. So the conclusion is that we cannot isolate statements or groups of statements from the context in which they are placed. As in the Bhagavatam, we'll see counter statements talking about and glorifying Krishna as Supreme Lord, etc. Or in the Upanishads, though some places are impersonal, other places are personal. So therefore we cannot isolate statements. We'll have to take the context of the whole. So, even though we do so, take the context of everything, we have to explain everything. Why there is impersonal statements if the God is personal. So of course, we can explain that simply by the fact that Bhagavan has three aspects, Brahman and Paramatma, as well as Bhagavan. That's one way of explaining it. Another way of explaining it, of course, is that the scriptures preach to persons of different qualifications. So therefore, in some sections of the Veda, like the Karma Kanda, Karma Yoga is glorified as supreme method because the people are only qualified for that. Other sections in the Upanishads particularly will glorify one Brahman with no qualities as the object of meditation, and then the goal is liberation. So people who are qualified for impersonal liberation, therefore it speaks in that way. And those persons who are qualified with Shraddha, in pure bhakti, then they are supplied texts which glorify Bhagavan. So for different types of people, different processes and different goals are glorified in the Vedas. And therefore we'll find the Lord described in various ways. For people who really cannot conceive of the Lord at all, the ultimate goal for them is simply to get a more purified existence in the material world on Svargaloka. And for them that is supreme. For the Gyanis, then, the goal is impersonal liberation. That's the limit of how much spiritual nature of the Lord they can accept. And for those who have pure faith in the process of bhakti, they can accept form of the Lord and prema as the goal. So the scriptures are preaching to various types of people, and therefore they explain various goals and various methods to attain those goals. It does not mean that all the paths are equal. You get the same result from everything. No. There is supreme goal, and the other goals are intermediate goals only. So the idea is that though these goals are there, if one achieves that goal, one should go on to the next higher goal and the next higher goal. That is the intention, not you stop at that one and that's the absolute. So ultimately, the scriptures do define a highest absolute goal. And then the method to attain that is the process of bhakti. So though there are so many statements about other entities and other goals, we should not be sidetracked by that. And we should also understand that then the other scriptural statements are there to describe the form of Bhagavan. So in this way there's no contradiction because we include all within one Supreme Lord. That is Advaya Jnana. He is one, but yet he has aspects of Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So therefore, it's not really a contradiction to describe these various aspects and glorify them separately. But we also have to understand that the ultimate is realizing Bhagavan. And that's the whole purpose of Bhagavatam. So, in order to be complete, it describes these various aspects of Brahman and Paramatma, as well as Bhagavan. With the understanding that they're all part of one realization in Bhagavan himself. So that's one way of explaining why we have these various texts which are impersonal, etc. And the Bhagavatam is such that if you are of lesser qualification, then the Bhagavatam presents itself in such a way that you could follow your lower path So if you want, you can read Bhagavatam and then you can follow the path of karma yoga. And if you want, you can read the Bhagavatam or study it and hear it, and then you can follow the path of jnana. Or if you have great faith, then you follow the path of bhakti. So it allows for people to follow these different methods also. And this is also proper in one sense because people cannot go beyond their qualification. So it is said that the Bhagavatam hides the highest goal from other people, and therefore it will praise these other processes. So those who are not qualified for bhakti will simply be attracted to these aspects of the Bhagavatam and get interested in personalism or karma yoga or whatnot in the different sections. So in this way, the Bhagavatam is called Mohini, that it hides the truth, the highest truth, and it presents other types of truth. Another way of looking at it is to say that the Bhagavatam is like Krishna, and Krishna himself presents himself differently to different people. So when Krishna went into the arena of Kamsa, to the young women, he was a Cupid. They saw him in Madhurya Rasa. To the cowherd boys, he was a friend in Sakya Rasa. To Vasudeva Devaki and Nanda Maharaj, he was their child in Vatsalya Rasa. And to the Vrishnis, he was their lord in Dasya Rasa. Simultaneously, they saw him differently. And then Kamsa saw him as death personified. And the enemy saw him as an angry person in Rodra Rasa. So various people saw him in different ways. Simultaneously, because Krishna can manifest himself in many ways. So similarly, Bhagavatam can also do that. And it will manifest many faces for many different types of people. So it is not in any way improper for the Bhagavatam to do this. It's just its nature that if you want to see Brahman, you'll see Brahman in Bhagavatam. If you want to see Paramatma, you can see Paramatma. If you want to see Krishna, you can see Krishna. So in this way, our presentation. However, those who are on the highest level, they should appreciate the highest meaning of the Bhagavatam, and the other things are all secondary. And to help us, we have the explanations given by our acharyas to elucidate what is the highest goal, what is the highest process, etc. So that is presented by our acharyas. So to do that, they will explain everything else in relation to the highest process only, and that sometimes these other processes are praised, but it's actually secondary to the main goal of the Bhagavatam. So in terms of logic, of course, though logic is secondary, we do need logic and intelligence to understand the meaning of Bhagavatam. So therefore we have some certain principles by which we can judge which is the absolute statement and what is the relative statement in the Bhagavatam. We examine the different statements, and then that statement should have a certain function in relation to the main purpose. So first we have to determine the main purpose of the Bhagavatam. And how do we do that? One is by looking at the initial statement of the Bhagavatam. Usually scriptures, when they write scriptures or the other works, they will introduce the work and they'll present what is the main subject matter so that people are not confused about it. What is the main topic discussed here? So that will be presented at the beginning, initial statement. And then at the end of the work, that will be repeated again, just to emphasize the fact that what was at the beginning is again the conclusion. So if we look for those statements in the Bhagavatam, then we will find what is the actual thing. It's a glorification of Bhagavan, Krishna, in the beginning and at the end. And then another thing is that throughout the Bhagavatam, we'll find the same statement repeated. That is called abhyas, or repetition. And that we'll find throughout the Bhagavatam again. Same theme is repeatedly presented in the Bhagavatam. And on the opposite side, negatively speaking, it condemns impersonalism. So from that, therefore, whenever we see the statements about impersonalism so wonderful, then we have to take it as secondary because of that. Right? So, and therefore, we have to read the scriptures with some intelligence and discrimination. And if we follow the acharyas, then we'll get the proper meaning of this. Right? So here we have statements about impersonalism. And therefore we have to take them in their proper place and not use these as evidence that the Bhagavatam is presenting impersonal Brahman as the highest, because Krishna himself is saying that here. So, and we see here that the very words of the Bhagavatam itself contradict that, because they say that Krishna himself was acting like a human being, and therefore he denies himself as being supreme, and he presents something higher than himself out of great humility and deference to certain scriptures.
Mentioned in the Shastras that one should not hear impersonalism, Bhagavati Bhashe Shunile. The question may be arise that why in Bhagavatam such topics are introduced? And that in the 10th canto, which is supposed to be displaying only the Bhagavan aspect.
Well, what is forbidden is to, most prominently, is to listen to the commentaries of the impersonalists, the Shankar Bhasya, for instance, which give an interpretation of the Upanishads and Vedanta Sutra to support their conclusion using logical explanations, etc. So that is what is actually forbidden. If it's in the Bhagavatam itself, then we accept the statements in their proper order. So as we've said, Bhagavatam does not reject Brahman, but we see that as simply an aspect of Bhagavan, that's all. So then it's not a problem if it's mentioned or in the Bhagavatam itself, because it's an aspect of Bhagavan, but we have to see it in its proper place. The impersonalist commentaries, on the other hand, present the Brahman as the highest entity, and everything else is secondary to that. And then they give some logical explanations why that is so. So that is what we're forbidden from hearing, those explanations.
Maharaj, here I saying that Satashvatra Upanishad explained regarding the Purusha form, the Supreme Lord. And other Upanishad we see not that much mention about this Lord's and his form. Normally it explains about the impersonalism. So we see with the Vyasa that he is explaining two things for the different audience.
Yeah.
But sometimes audience might not be that much expert to grasp the real meaning. Whose one is correct, whose is wrong, because same person is giving. So it might confuse to the audience.
Well, they'll be attracted to a certain aspect because they're qualified for that. So if they're attracted to impersonalism, then they'll be attracted to the impersonal statements in the Upanishads, and then they'll make it completely impersonal. And they will give secondary importance to the statements of the Svetasvara Upanishad or Mahanarayana Upanishad, and disregard that more or less. Those who are Vaishnavas, on the other hand, will concentrate on the personal statements, and then they'll understand the impersonal statements as secondary to that. So it depends on the faith of the individual. They can take either of them. Right?
And the question, Maharaj, you see, suppose if the person, take the example like a child, when child starts growing up, normally he has a zero knowledge, he doesn't have any knowledge now. So it's dependent on what kind of knowledge the child is getting. In the future he will grow up according to that. So living in this material world, no, they don't have any knowledge right now. So if they get the personal knowledge, then they'll pick up that personal form of the Supreme Lord. But if they associate with the art, if they get that from the beginning in personal, automatically they will attract this personal knowledge.
Well, we say that the source of faith is the basis of doing bhakti, and then faith arises by association. So a good association, and then we'll develop proper faith.
Here association, when you say this association also, Krishna is sending the association, not that person is coming directly. Because that Lord is sitting in the hearts of everybody, and He is according to the design of here also there is a design also, soul also there, and according to the design of the soul that He is getting the association. But ultimately Lord is sending the association.
Well, we can say mercy of devotees also. They're allowed to choose where they want to distribute mercy. So the devotees themselves can do that.
Maharaj, in this case, we see that Krishna is speaking, it sounds as if that Krishna himself is made up of matter. This is what he is indicating in this verse.
Well, in one sense, we can say everything comes from Brahman, and the Brahman is this pure one entity, and then it divides up into variety. That's the implication. He doesn't get into that at all, though. He's just indicating there's just one supreme entity, that's all. But as I said at the beginning, he is actually taking the position of a jiva, so he wants to deny himself as the Supreme Lord, so therefore he says, okay, this one entity is higher than me, and I'm just another living entity.
Maharaj, the problem that I have is that Krishna is absolute truth. So how something comes from him which is not absolute?
Well, we many statements like that. Krishna tells lies, Krishna does this and that, Krishna steals. If he's the absolute truth, why does he do any of these things? But that's part of his pastimes. It's on a different level. So here he's playing the role of a human being, not only in Vrindavan, even in Dwarka. So then he'll do aspects of in his conduct which will make him look like an ordinary human being. So he acts like a grihasta person in Dwarka, and he gets up early in the morning and he meditates on himself. He meditates, but he's meditating on, why does he have to meditate? Because he is the Lord, but he's meditating on the Lord, whatever. So he does many activities to put him in the position of an ordinary human being. So that's particularly for Krishna, that's one of his characteristics which make him confusing for some people.
Maharaj, we understand, is it that the whole of Bhagavatam is meant for the purpose of glorification or love of gopis for Krishna? So how do we, there are so many verses talks about Sarga, Visarga and so many other aspects. How do we connect those verses with that subject?
Well, and that's for people who are doing sadhana bhakti. So in sadhana bhakti, we have to understand the position of the Lord in relation to the jiva, first of all. And that the Supreme Lord is very different from the jiva. He's not exactly the jiva. He's quite different, and that he is perfect, etc. And the jiva is small, etc. So we need that sambandha gyan. That's essential for us to do any type of bhakti. So therefore, these different topics of the Bhagavatam, Sarga, Visarga, etc. are there to show the difference between the Lord and the jiva. Based on that, then we can go into the process of bhakti.
The impersonalists read the Bhagavatam. He is roughly understanding.
Different, very
Then
different.
we see that Sukadeva also being impersonalist, he got attracted to Krishna's wonderful, beautiful features. How is it? Impersonal when he read
Well,
Bhagavatam.
he had the mercy of Vyasadeva and Krishna, so he was an impersonalist, and by hearing about Krishna, then he became attracted to Krishna. Others who are, let's say, don't get that mercy of the devotees or Krishna, then they read the Bhagavatam and they get a completely impersonal thing. It depends on their association and the mercy they get. They haven't developed proper faith. So their initial faith is in impersonalism, and therefore, even though they're exposed to Bhagavatam, they don't get affected by it in the proper way, because they're differently qualified.
Actually, is there any difference between Brahmavadis and Mayavadis or the same technical word? Or
Well,
like-
Mayavadis are those who believe that everything is Maya and only Brahman is true. There are some impersonalists who believe that the world is real, but ultimately the source is one Brahman, impersonal Brahman, not Bhagavan. So that's the Brahmavadi. He doesn't necessarily say the world's false, but he just says it's secondary and the highest entity is this one supreme spirit. That's all, impersonal spirit.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. This many days we have, I was believing that only Bhagavatam can give the ultimate aspects of devotion to a jiva. But today, according to that jiva's understanding and position, he will get the same, that means he can understand.
Various things, according to his qualification.
Yeah, he can understand. So, what is the hope for this Kali Yuga people? Then,
We have to give them proper faith. Once they get the faith, then we can preach to them. So we have to generate proper faith in them.
Thanks, Maharaj. If you see, according to the person's approach to Bhagavatam and then the qualification, so there is a criteria, then there is a certain need of qualification to attain bhakti. And then, from Prabhu's question answer, we see that the mercy of the devotees is the only qualification or any other qualification for a person to receive bhakti.
What's that?
Is any...
Yeah. Sometimes maybe Krishna can give mercy, but that's very rare. So usually it's devotee's mercy, and even the devotee's mercy is accidental because the person without faith is not looking for anything. So therefore the devotee gives it to him, but that person is not seeking anything. So it's accidentally he'll get the mercy of the devotee. And that won't act immediately also because it's accidental and he has no faith. But over many lifetimes of getting this accidental bhakti, which we call sukriti, then he develops some faith. And then he gets some curiosity about Supreme Lord and whatever. Then he approaches devotees, and then he asks questions, and then he gets some knowledge, and then he accepts it. And then he begins bhakti.
Sometimes we find during our Sankirtan days, when we go to a village where hardcore Mayavadis like Tirunelveli, we find even the Shiva Vaishnavas, they don't do much service. But when the Mayavadis and the Smartas, they come and they offer flowers, they put rangoli, and they get attracted to the bhajans. But they don't take our philosophy, they don't buy the books, but they know we only teach personalism. So indirectly, maybe when they do the service, they can in future.
Yeah, if they do anything, any contact is good. It may not be pure, it's not pure bhakti, obviously, because they
While
don't
doing
have
the
that
service,
feeling.
they may not think I'm doing for the
Well,
Bhagavan.
it's accidental. In other words, they take prasadam or something, or they see the deity, but they're not thinking, this is Supreme Lord. They may think, oh, it's just another material form or whatever. We don't know what they're thinking. But by this accidental type of bhakti, then they get some little bit of sukriti, and that begins to change the atma. And then that turns into faith, and then the faith leads to bhakti.
श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय महाराज की जय शिवाजी भगवान की जय हरे
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Ram, Hare